welcome to the Donut Hole, your place where a couple of guys sit around and pontificate about all kinds of crazy things. My name's Paul.
And I'm Jason.
And we're your hosts here at the Donut Hole. So, how you doing, Jason?
Good.
So I've had a very interesting little week as far as social media, which social media is the devil. I'm sure we both agree on that. But I was, one of my more leftist acquaintances on Facebook made a post about the plight of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang Autonomous Region in China. And, you know, I will be the first to say that, you know, China does have human rights violations and abuses, and there are things they do that are not cool. I'm also not a big fan of the current administration there in the PRC. I don't really like President Xi. I like President Hu a lot better. I don't like the new guy. He's definitely more along the lines of a dictator. You know, because he's, for crying out loud, he's declared himself president for life. We've not seen that since Mao. So, yeah, not a big fan. But she put up this video, and I think it was from one of these left-wing, far left-wing, nothing but propaganda mouthpiece. I think it was Policy Mike or one of those goofy, you know, super leftist outlets. And they're interviewing this lady, and she's talking about, well, you saw the video. Kind of tell us what your take on it was before I go off on my spiel.
Well, my take on it was it's just this typical Facebook left-leaning, when they introduce somebody as an activist, that kind of thing. So you know where you're getting your information from. It's just, it's a little clickbaity.
Yeah.
Is what I thought about it.
It was definitely clickbaity. Let's just look at the video in question here.
Right now, China's detained over 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims into concentration camps. They are forced to denounce Islam, adopt atheism, and pledge allegiance to the Chinese state. They would spend hours on end chanting in their crowded cells, "There is no such thing as religion," or "All hail the Chinese state," or "All hail Chinese President Xi Jinping." And if the detainees disobey, or if there's any type of resistance, there is torture being used.
There are at least 800,000 and possibly up to a couple of million folks in these detention facilities.
Nails are being pulled out, teeth are being pulled out. They're using snakes to interrogate. People are being beaten until they're dead. They're being sterilized, a method used in genocide. They're forced to sit on what's called a tiger chair, where they're clamped down on this chair for hours on end, oftentimes in solitary confinement. People are being sent to these camps for random reasons. One of them could easily be you are in contact with someone abroad. You have a family member abroad. You engage in religion. So if you pray, if you mention the word God in your speech, if you fast, any type of indication that you are practicing religion, that is enough for you to be sent to the camps. And thousands of people have actually been transferred from these camps to prisons. One of my relatives in early 2017 got put inside one of these camps. Last November, he came out dead. One of my relatives got sent to a camp because he went to the United States to attend my cousin's wedding in 2014. Last August, he got sentenced to 15 years of prison. Many of my relatives, we don't know if they're alive or dead. And there's not a single Uyghur who doesn't have at least one family member in these camps or some form of detention or prison. The worst part is when someone dies, their bodies are not taken to their families, but rather their bodies are cremated. And that's another way for China to hide the evidence of bodies coming out of these camps. And it doesn't give us a clear idea of how many people are dying. All of this stuff is happening in secret. The children of these detainees have been sent to state-run orphanages and boarding schools where they are taught to hate their own religion, identity, and are forced to speak Chinese, are subject to abuse and torture. The parents don't know where their kids are. Most towns and villages in East Turkestan are almost empty. Around 70 to 80% of the civilians are all gone. You walk through the street and it's eerily silent because most people are in some form of detention or prison. Schools and factories are now being transformed into these concentration camps. The entire nation of East Turkestan has essentially become a dungeon for its people because China monitors their every action, even in the homes. So there are millions of Han government cadres who are living in Uyghur homes to make sure they're not engaging in religion and to assess their political views. Practicing Islam is completely banned. So for me to even say something like, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow, God willing," is prohibited because you said the word God. Even having an Islamic name is a crime. So you have to change your name from a name like Muhammad or Fatima to an ethnic Han name. Thousands of Uyghur women are also forced to marry ethnic Han Chinese men. And this is another way to get rid of the next generation of Uyghurs. So why is China cracking down on Uyghurs and Turkic Muslims specifically? East Turkestan is really rich in minerals and resources. So by putting people into camps and basically carrying out an ethnic cleansing, China is attempting to maintain tight control over the mineral-rich land. You might wonder why the world has been really silent about this whole issue. And it's because of a few reasons. Number one, China has tightly controlled its media. So a lot of what's happening can't really be revealed outside to the rest of the world. Number two, even when people know about it, or even when governments know about it, they are forced to remain silent due to Chinese pressure and their economic and strategic ties to the country. So the question is, what can you do? What we need you to do is raise awareness, because right now, most of the world has no idea that this is happening. Pressure your government leaders to acknowledge China's occupation of East Turkestan and its systematic campaign to wipe out the Uyghurs and other people of East Turkestan. Support your local Uyghur communities. They're in dire need of international support. Come out to their protests, organize protests in front of Chinese embassies and bodies that can can actually take action to challenge China's ethnic cleansing of
Okay, we're going
Uyghurs.
to take a few moments to kind of dispel just a couple of minutes that we're gone over this propaganda piece. First off, China does allow for people to practice religion, pretty much so long as they're not engaging in sedition or it's not some weird goofy cult thing. They're pretty much okay with it. Again, China's not perfect. They do have plenty of human rights violations, and we could talk about Falun Gong, but we're not here to do that. Anyway, the whole sedition thing does come into effect with a lot of the religious groups from the West, the missionaries that came over. They oftentimes did interject politics into their gospel preaching, so that's kind of why the Chinese government put a stop to that. Here's a quick shot of a Eastern Orthodox church that I took last time I was in China. I know that's not the reason we're here, so let's get along to the mosques. Now, these were pictures taken at the Great Mosque in Xi'an, which is China's original and first capital. This is the city that's also famous for the terracotta warriors. This is actually a really pretty mosque. It's over in kind of the Muslim quarter, where there's a pretty decent sized ethnic Uyghur population that live within the city. Really fantastic food. Most people were really friendly. People at the mosque were really friendly. Just here you can see a couple of photos that I took. Again, I apologize about the camera quality. This was several years ago, but I did not have a good camera at the time. Also, while in post-production, came across this video here. It's actually another video of the same lady from the first video, showing pretty much her true style. You could tell the first piece was a propaganda piece. Second one, she's blatantly coming out and saying, hey, we're part of, this quote-unquote government in exile, which would, I think, pretty much qualify it as sedition per the Chinese law. Again, I'm not an expert in Chinese law specifically, despite having a degree in Asian studies.
Welcome to the 2015 Annual East Turkestan Awareness Day Conference, organized by East Turkestan Government in Exile.
I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out.
And I simply replied to the post to her, and she was, I'm not going to mention names or anything, but, she was reasonable. She's like, because I posted something to the extent of, the situation's a little bit more involved than just this, and she's like, oh, okay, well, tell me more, genuine curiosity there, and I can respect that, because on the surface, if you don't really know much about the area, and let's face it, I'm sure not a lot of people do know a lot about Xinjiang, you're going to hear some information and just assume that's what's happening.
Sure.
Right? I mean, for a lot of people, you hear about some far-flung place you've never been, you're going to just assume whatever you're told. Because you've never been there, you don't really know anything about it. So anyway, I went into a fairly long expose, citing it academically. As for those of you out there that were questioning this, it's kind of funny because I went into this big expose talking about, the issues that they are facing, some of the bad things that the Chinese government are doing, but also the fact that Xinjiang Autonomous Region is known to have a separatist movement within the population there that want to break away basically the whole province and rename it Eastern Turkestan. For those of you that don't do geographically placement, Xinjiang Autonomous Region is in the far west of China. It borders a lot of the stans, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan as well, Russia to the north. And a lot of these separatists will actually jump over into Pakistan, because the border is pretty porous. They'll jump over into Pakistan and Afghanistan and what have you, and they'll actually, even some of the guys will train in like the Al Qaeda and various Mujahideen training camps, and come back as terrorists and cause havoc to the Chinese government. I mean, the Chinese government's not innocent. I'm not saying they are, but on the flip side of it, when you've got some group of crazy, guys, jihadists that come over on a massive, guns are still a little bit more difficult to smuggle across the border, but it has been done. Most of them usually to carry out knife attacks where, 30, 40, 50, 60 people get killed.
Right.
And, if you're facing up against that, these people that are bouncing back and forth through places in the world that we know are legitimate training centers, even the United States has given the Chinese government money to help them as far as their terrorist problem. So, the person in the video was going on about, just how terrible it was and how, millions. At one point she said thousands, another point she says millions, at another point she says many. She's very inconsistent. And of course she doesn't refer to it as Xinjiang, she refers to it as Eastern Turkestan.
And that's one thing you asked about what I noticed about the video. That was one of the first things I noticed, was that there was no facts and figures. You know, it was just, like you said, many thousands, talking about entire towns being emptied.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how big is a town? 10, 20,000 people, even for a small town in China. Mm-hmm. That was, I noticed that there was nothing concrete there.
Yeah. So I academically sourced all this and, you know, put it in thing. She said, oh, thanks, I'm going to look into it more. And then, I guess an associate of hers maybe, or somebody else just chimes in and it's like, I don't need to know, you know, anything more about it. I just know that, you know, they're going off and basically belittling call me an idiot. And for those of you out there that are questioning if I'm an idiot on the matter, I have to point this out because I pointed it out to him too, and he was just an idiot and what have you. But I just so happened to have went to university to study very specifically. I think I can speak with some authority on the subject because my degree is in Asian studies here, as you can clearly see. So, I mean, it's like, and I took a picture of it. I'm like, dude, not only have I lived there before, but this was what I studied in college. You know, I did pour up quite a bit of energy into that. So it's like, you're a complete imbecile.
Yeah.
And he's clearly an idiot, clearly an ideologue. And that's what it basically boiled down to. He's just like, I don't need to know the facts. You're just an idiot. And he just started berating me and I think called me a Nazi and or something to that effect. And then equated me to Trump and said I had tiny hands, which I guess I kind of do have tiny hands, but I don't know. It was just freaking ridiculous. It's identity politics at its finest.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the reason I don't engage in social media very much. You know, I have a Facebook account. I really don't post anything on there. And I definitely don't get into it with people on there because that's what you run into. It's infuriating.
But yeah, you definitely can get into some goofy debates on Facebook or flame wars or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and you know, when people start calling you Nazi and you know, talk about your tiny hands and they somehow equate a discussion about politics in China with President Trump somehow. I don't know how he got involved in this, but you can pretty much say that guy's he's either a troll or a moron. I don't know which. Could be either or both. Yeah.
But it's one of the problems you see with intersectionality in politics today. It's just getting way out of hand.
Yeah. Well, it's you had mentioned to me that he had made a comment, something to the effect of, "There's only the oppressor and the oppressed."
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Because actually, one of the things I mentioned at the end of the first academic post that I put, and everything was cited with legitimate news articles, ranging the gamut from BBC to CNN, like all across the thing. And these are not necessarily far right-leaning news sources. This is just middle of the road. Still left.
Center left.
If anything. News sources. So it's not like, I'm trying to give her like a Fox News article and, do anything like that because I know she's a leftist. So I'm going to give her news articles so that she can research and feel, even amongst herself, that these are good news articles, which is its own thing, but...
Right. Another subject for another day.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, here are these. And I told her that with any of these things, which you're generally going to have, and this is true with almost everything, and this is something the other guy and I got into. I'm glad you brought that up. Was that in anything, whenever you're dealing with these kind of things, you have one side of the story, and you have the other side of the story, and sometimes other sides as well. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Almost always the truth is in the middle. Bringing this into, like, say something like any kind of intersectionality politics like today, or any kind of, let's take BLM, for example. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, we briefly discussed this last week.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
When it comes to something like that, if you take the narrative of Black Lives Matter, cops are out to kill black people all the time. And cops are the devil, and there's that. And then you have the thin blue line folks who are like, cops can never do wrong.
Right.
And the truth is, in fact, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Some cases were justified shootings. Others were completely not, and complete abuses of power.
Exactly.
Which is why we have to take things on an individual basis too. That's what I don't like about this, intersectional oppressor idea is, we fought a long time with a liberal society. I mean, liberal is in the classical term, the sense that would be in the 60s, 70s, 80s. To judge people on their individual merits rather than on, group identities, whether that, and I would say immutable characteristics like being black or, Which that's a lot of intersectionality is immutable characteristics, things you can't change, being a woman, being black. But a lot of it's not. A lot of it's choices as well. And we strove for so long as a society to get away from that. But yet now we have the hard left driving us back towards judging people for immutable characteristics. Now, they think that's okay because they're doing it on a positive way, they think, because they're saying, oh, well, you're a victim if you're a part of this class and a part of that class. But I find that still to just be the same judging on group identity rather than individual circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's absolutely asinine.
Yeah.
Because like you brought up, everything is an individual basis. I mean, that's the beauty of being, what should be a quote unquote liberal Western society where people are treated on their individual merits. Mm-hmm. It's a meritocracy, little petty differences be damned. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not supposed to be, oh, you're black, so you're this, or you're white, so you're that, or you're female, you're this, you're the gay, you're that, you're whatever. No, you're a person, and what do you bring to the table?
Right.
What are you? Who are you? Are you a good person? Are you a bad person? Are you intellectually inclined? Are you mechanically inclined? Who are you?
Right.
Not, oh, you're part of this group, you're that.
Yeah. And I think it tends to strip people down and it debases humanity.
It does.
Because you're not an individual. You are simply a product of whatever intersecting realities you exist in. So, how can you be an individual human when you're taught your entire life that, well, you're disadvantaged because you're this, you're disadvantaged because you're that, and you have 3 of these characteristics, well, you're never going to make it anywhere because you're just a victim. That's debasing. And honestly, I would say offensive. If I were a person being told that would be offensive to me. Mm-hmm. I'm Jason. I'm not a white, straight male. That's what I find amazing about this idea is that people get up in the morning and when they're brushing their teeth and looking in the mirror, do they really look at themselves and say, I don't ever look at myself and say I'm a white, straight male.
Yeah.
I don't even it never even crosses my mind. And of course, the opposition would say, well, that's because you have privilege. Mm-hmm. That it's not being shoved in your face. And I'm like, well, it is being shoved in my face all the time because that's all you see on media and social media. And so it is being shoved in my face. But that's a sad reality, I think, for people to live, that they have been taught by society, you are simply the sum of your intersecting oppressions. Not a good way to live.
Yeah. No, I agree. And anytime that, because like I said, ultimately at the end of the day, the truth is somewhere in the middle and all these things. And which brings forth the individualistic nature of people. People are individuals. They're not just a group. Mm-hmm. There can be some overarching group characteristics that are fairly similar from a cultural standpoint. Mm-hmm. Most people, as if you go with these generalizations, most people in America like pizza and hamburgers. Mm-hmm. But not everybody does. Mm-hmm. Just because someone's from America doesn't mean they're going to like pizza. They might not actually like pizza. Yeah. That's a possibility. Yeah. Because they're an individual.
Yeah.
Granted, most of us do. I like pizza. I'm sure you like pizza. Mm-hmm. But not everybody does.
Right.
It's the thing with coffee. Most Americans drink coffee, but I also know plenty of Americans that don't like coffee.
And also, assuming group oppression status off immutable characteristics is in today's world ridiculous. Now, of course, there was a time in the 60s, if you were black in America, more than likely you were oppressed in some way. Mm-hmm. However, not every single black person in America in the 60s was oppressed. I guarantee you there was a few who weren't, that had more privileges than, say, a poor sharecropper in the South. Mm-hmm. But by and far, at that point in time, you could say the majority probably did have some issues. Mm-hmm. In today's world, I really don't think you can say that. I think we've gotten to a point where I have never met anybody that actively tries to oppress people because of their minority status or because of their sexuality. I mean, where's the unicorn that they say, where's the Nazi, that they say is out there? Because I've never met a single person that has actively tried to oppress these people. Mm-hmm. Maybe a bit of first world problems. We've all seen the meme. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think most people have met a person who actively tries to oppress people.
Yeah, I don't think so. Generally, as a society, we've reached a point where we don't tolerate it. If there was somebody out there that was actively oppressing people, we, as a society, wouldn't tolerate it. So, while, yes, I'm sure you can find an example somewhere. If you try hard enough, you could probably find an example. But by and large, through the general notion of society and society at large, if you will, that's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a non-issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody were to do that, you know, the rest of society would drum them out.
Right.
I mean,
No.
so.
No. And actually, you look at some of the fastest growing demographics. For example, you know, we're often taught that women are part of the intersectional coalition. They're oppressed. Young women are attending college at way higher rates.
Yep.
You know, they're making higher salaries than young men, and the millennial and the whatever they call the generation after the millennials. They make more money. They're getting better educations.
They're living longer?
Yeah, they live longer. Men's lifespan declined for the third year in a row. Mm-hmm. Overall lifespan in America declined for the third year in a row, but it's majority men because it's majority suicides and opioid addictions. Mm-hmm. And that's great that young women are making more money. I mean, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But where's this oppression that we keep hearing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, not only that, but, you know, you brought up the whole suicides and opioid addiction. Men are more likely to be suicide victims. Men are more likely to be incarcerated. Men are more likely to die in war. Men are more likely to die earlier in general. Men are more likely to, what was the other one? That was another one I had.
Die at work.
Die at work. They're more likely to, just die early in general. So, I mean, all these negatives against men, and plus, like you said, more women are graduating from college than men, more women are getting higher paid jobs than men. There's no oppression. What it almost seems that those that are highly interested in this movement of intersectionality and identity politics, that here's the alleged hierarchy with, the demonic, straight white male, I guess, at the top. They're not content from taking it like this and just being like this. No, they want to do this.
Yeah.
And invert the quote unquote hierarchy. And they just want to put anybody who's closer to the top at the bottom and put everybody that's at the bottom allegedly up at the top.
Well, if the whole view is there's only oppressor and oppressed, well, then I want to be the oppressor. Mm-hmm. If there's only two options, why would I choose to be the oppressed?
Yeah.
And that's why I think that's a garbage philosophy. Mm-hmm. Because there's not only the oppressor and the oppressed. Once again, like we talked, the whole donut hole thing, mm-hmm. It's the truth somewhere in the middle, most people are not actively being oppressed in America. Most people are not actively oppressing other people in America. They're just going about their daily lives. And then that's when you start to hear this rhetoric of, well, you're doing it, but you don't know it. Or it's a systematic problem. It's not individuals that are individually racist. It's a systematic issue. And then you just get into, theories that can't be proven or are just wild speculation.
Yeah. No, definitely agree on that. So anyway, guys, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to get back to you here after the commercials. And if there's any content that you'd like to see in the future, please reach out to us. We'd love to know what your thoughts are on the program, what you'd like to see, what you don't like, and try to create a show that not only we enjoy, but you guys enjoy as well.
And the more money you give us, the more we will like you.
Welcome back to the Donut Hole. So we had a nice little break. If you guys are enjoying the content, be sure to hit the subscribe button there, possibly the notification bell and that like button. We definitely appreciate it. Of course, there's also Patreon if you're feeling really ambitious. And if you've got any future topics you'd like us to kind of go over here on the Donut Hole, we'd be more than happy to take those into consideration and kind of get some content that you guys want to hear and see out there as well.
And more money, less background noise.
Which is always a good thing. Newer equipment is always better than hodgepodge and stuff together.
Yes.
So, anyway, let's keep going with the podcast. So, last time we were talking about intersectional politics and all that garbage. Let's kind of get away from that for a little bit. It just makes me sick.
Yeah, it's one of those things you can talk in circles all day long.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about NASA.
Okay.
So clearly, you look at, say, NASA and what have you. And I know we got to get your buddy Will here on the podcast at some point because he really likes those conspiracy things.
Yeah, he believes the moon landing was faked.
Which, I can't really get behind that one, but
nor can I.
It could be an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be interested to hear what he has to say about it. But Yeah, let's talk a bit about NASA and how they've kind of went from this pinnacle of, scientific breakthroughs to kind of a running joke.
Yeah. Now that being said, I will say their robotics and probe division is doing fantastic things. They're doing great work, unprecedented stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as manned space travel, it's it doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't. I think, if I'm not mistaken, at current we're sending our astronauts over to Kazakhstan to the cosmodrome that the Soviets are still on lease for using, or the Russians rather, to continue, basically hitching rides with the Russians at this point to go up in space, which is definitely a disgrace.
Yeah. Now, they are working on certain things, like the Orion capsule, I believe, is really just kind of a throwback to the Apollo program type concept, just super modernized. But, I mean, I don't know the exact year when the space shuttle was decommissioned, but it's pretty bad when, we have a place like Russia who has the economy of Italy taking us up into space and having a manned space program. And China now has a manned space program. And the biggest superpower in the world does not.
Yeah. And for somebody that allegedly won the space race, that's definitely an embarrassment, I think.
Yes.
If there's anything that, God forbid, taxation is theft, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, but if, we're going to do that, we're going to have taxes and what have you, I think breakthroughs in the sciences in this particular area is one of the things that I think is a good place for tax dollars to go.
Well, obviously, because there's no profit in it right now. So if we do want to make advances in areas that there's no profit motive for the capitalist model, you have to subsidize it to the government, which we currently are subsidizing all the private space companies, which, I am all for privatization, but with lack of a profit model there other than from governments, is it really a private space program, or is it just subcontracting out like the military does? I tend to think it's a bit more subcontracting it out like the military does.
Yeah, it's actually kind of more along the lines of exactly what it is. It's subcontracting. You're being subcontracted out. So that's that's kind of NASA at least.
Yeah.
Kind of touched on that one. Let's keep going down the donut hole, some other kind of more conspiracy nutty things. So I'm sure you've seen those DNA things, right? Like and the genealogy things, like I think 23andMe has one, Ancestry.com has one. What are your thoughts on those? Because those always look awesome, don't they? I mean, tracing your lineage back a little bit.
Yeah, I would find that just fun, just to see what's going on, and because a lot of people end up finding out their families just were completely misinformed, even just 3 or 4 generations ago. People thought they were, from Eastern Europe. They ended up being from Western Europe. They ended up being, half African when they thought they were only maybe a 1/10 African. Just, it's kind of fun concept, but I think, you're also giving your DNA to someone to be sequenced.
Yeah, and actually, I actually recently looked at one of those things going over the fine print that everybody just clicks next on. When you download a program or whatever, you just scroll through or click next and get through it. You don't really read all that legal jargon and what have you, the disclaimer. Come to find out that when you submit your DNA, because I was looking at doing this, I thought this would be a really fun little project, kind of see a little more learn more about myself, because as human beings, we're always naturally curious. I think on our last episode, we talked about a little bit the origins of people. We always want to know who we are. That's kind of fundamental part of being human, is we want to know that we're naturally curious. And myself included in that, I'm naturally curious. But then looking into it, when you submit your DNA, yes, they send it to some place to be sequenced. Not only that, but they are now allowed to disclose that information to third parties. Now, who is that third party? Is it genetic research laboratory that wants to study more on, genealogy and genetics? Okay, that's okay, maybe. Or is that third party Google? They don't disclose that.
Yeah.
We already know that, companies such as Google do a lot of data mining through metadata and tracking your online presence, and now even come to find offline presence. That we'll see what store, they'll target you with an ad, and they'll kind of follow you around with your phone and oh, you went to the store, and then oh, this showed up on you bought this with your card, and oh yeah, this was a positive marketing campaign that we, got you to buy this particular product, and okay, now we know this, and then they can continue to build a bigger profile on you. And obviously, we already know that Google is now cooperating with the Chinese government with their programs as well. So they obviously have like the face recognition thing with all, because they have more cameras than they know what to do with over there on everywhere in big cities. First tier, second tier, third tier, even, I think fourth tier cities have cameras virtually everywhere. So they can track people around. They're doing the whole social credit score. For those of you that don't know what that's about, we'll probably spend a whole other episode talking about that. But basically, it's whatever you do is either rated good, bad, or neutral, and that will affect your social credit score. You get a high social credit score, maybe you don't have a deposit at your hotel when you go stay there. You get a low one, now you can't even rent a hotel. And that's just kind of the surface of it. It goes into a lot more things than that.
Well, I think what it boils down to a bit too is, and this is already happening with social media regardless of DNA sequencing or not, but the consumer is no longer the consumer. The consumer is the product.
Exactly, yeah.
The consumer is the product that's being sold to companies. I've heard the term debt slave used before. And that's the goal of companies in a capitalist system, is to get people to spend as much money as they possibly can on these products. Now, I also believe, of course, there's individual responsibility involved in that. Nobody's, innocent of, they spend their own money how they see fit. But that being said, there's a lot of psychology that goes into this, and it's recently been exposed on video games, although you won't see this on mainstream media. There are people that go and have master's degrees and study how to make kids addicted to video games. It's not a far stretch to say they're going to do that to marketing towards us as well.
Well, they've already started with things like that. They've already done exposés of subliminal marketing in like movie theaters, for example, where it's, you need a Coca-Cola, you need popcorn. They've been doing this a lot in marketing as well. There's actually a really brilliant book that came out on the subject of social engineering. Came out in the 20s, I think. I can't think of, for the life of me, I cannot think of the author's name. But he was really big in marketing. I know that it's what actually got women to start smoking in the 30s and 40s. And because before that, it was really a taboo thing in the West. They got them to do that. There was a whole article that was released, I think it was released in New York City, saying something about it being a liberating thing or whatever, and that became, basically then on, it became somewhat socially acceptable. And also, again, I cannot think of the author's name for the life of me at the moment. I should have, because this just came to me, this was not show prep stuff. But I believe also, who was the Nazi propagandist in
Goebbels?
Goebbels actually studied it as well. And it's like it was like one of the fundamental pillars of his work to be able to learn how this guy operated, learn his techniques, and apply it in Nazi Germany as well.
Well, we've already seen massive changes in our society because of advertising. And it's scary because it's getting so much more sophisticated. It used to be just simple mental tricks. For example, the diamond engagement band. So many people think this is some big tradition. It's less than 100 years old. De Beers invented this to sell more diamonds. And then they just randomly came up with a figure of 3 months' salary. And now you look at today's world, everybody just thinks it's traditional, and that's what you're supposed to do. And if you don't do it, well, you're a bad person. Well, that was pretty masterful of De Beers to, in less than 100 years, make a societal tradition that exclusively sells their product.
Yeah.
And that was 1940s and 1930s advertising. You look at it nowadays, and this goes back to the DNA thing, because I know the new DNA 23andMe's, it used to just be your ancestry. Now they can tell you, muscle composition. I mean, they advertise all this stuff, what foods you may like, what foods you may not like. It's not too far-fetched to think that they can take your DNA and advertise to you on your phone, say genetically you particularly like this one food. They advertise it to you all the time. Or whatever, it could be anything that you're genetically inclined to do. they'll just gently steer you in that direction, using psychology and genetics combined to get a debt slave. I know that's what the conspiracy theorists call it, but that's what you get.
Well, that's kind of what it is. It's almost become because you talk to most Americans. I mean, how much money do they have set aside in savings? A couple $100 tops?
Yeah,
$1,000 maybe?
Saw a study as most Americans have less than $1,000.
Yeah. So, and honestly, as far as global money values, if you can come up with $4,000 in cash, or $4,000, you have access to $4,000, you are in the top 40% of wealthy people in the world. If you can scrape together $4,000, which is crazy to think about, and honestly, the top 1% is only $800,000 in being in like assets to be able to actually have access to. That puts you in the top 1%. And everyone's always playing the top 1%. It's like,
it's 1% of 1%.
Exactly, it's the one 100th of 1%.
Yeah.
Those are the ones you gotta kind of steer clear of. It's not the guy that, him and his wife did well, and they've got,
But it's just,
$800,000
it's become a mass consumerist culture. And I do find it so funny. I talk to friends and family that complain that, Christmas is too mass consumerist. And then they'll ask me, what do you want for Christmas? I say nothing. I don't want to, we'll spend some time together, have a meal, have some drinks, have a good time. But yet they complain about the mass consumerist aspect, but they feel like they must do it. They feel pressured by society. It's because I'm sure you've met plenty of people who are like, oh, Black Friday, it's so terrible. Then they end up going out on Black Friday with their family. So, the populace has a lot to blame there as well. It's not just companies manipulating them, which is obviously true, but the populace does have a lot of responsibility in that.
Alrighty, let's move on. Let's move along to I guess another topic. Actually, kind of along the same lines. Recent study also found, obviously within the Western world, and we kind of still have the canary in the coal mine in Japan, but it seems that population rates amongst developed countries and Western countries in particular are on the decline. And also come to find out, I found out that actually rates of infertility have increased, which is an odd correlation.
Particularly among developed countries. Undeveloped countries have higher fertility rates than developed countries, which is odd.
So it does kind of lend itself, and if you look at the kind of the social pressures in the West, I know that the idea of settling down and having a family is kind of being pushed to the back burner, which is kind of the fundamental basis of what a society is about. It's about the next generation always. It's always about the upcoming. It's about moving society forward and developing more. And now it's you can have kids later if you really want them, but you don't need them. There's pressures on both parents, quote unquote, to be in the workforce. There's pressures on people to not have kids in general. I don't know. What's kind of your take on that?
I think it's just a natural consequence of prosperity. Because you look at every prosperous Western country, and Japan being not a Western country, population rates tend to level off and then decline the more prosperous the place becomes. I don't think we've seen the decline in the U.S., of course, taking out immigration, native-born population. But we do see that in Japan. We see a decline, which I don't think is altogether a bad thing, but unfortunately our entire world economic system is built off a growth model. I often wondered when I was younger, you see a company like, say, McDonald's, Walmart. Well, they didn't hit their projected growth, so their stock went down. And I'm thinking, well, they still made massive amounts of money, still a very profitable corporation. But that's just the way we think of everything, is continual growth. So that's also going to the migration, is where European countries want migration, is they have a very stagnant birth rate, even worse than the U.S., and they got to bring people in to support a growing economy, because how can the economy grow if there's no young generation to take up that economy?
I'm actually going to call you out right now, and this is something I noticed because I have kids. So we actually have to watch a lot of the young education programming and stuff. They'll want to watch, say, Sesame Street or whatever. And I remember we were watching an episode of Sesame Street, and they were talking about birds and migration. And you just actually fell into the same trap. didn't use the word immigration, you used the word migration.
Yep, that's true. I didn't notice that, but I did, yeah.
I kind of thought that was kind of interesting because it seems that when you refer to immigrants as migrants, you're not, there's a bit of a disconnect there. And I think it's going back to controlling the dialectics. If you control the dialectics, you kind of control the conversation and steer it wherever you want to go.
Yeah. And in all honesty, I just said that word because that's what you hear all the time. In my brain, I was not thinking a migrant. I was thinking an immigrant. Somebody who comes to the country, stays there for the rest of their life, supports the economy. That's the whole, but, I guess that's what I hear on the news all the time. That's what you hear on the radio. You hear migrants, the migrant caravan, the migrant crisis in Europe, where it's really, like you said, it's immigrants.
And that's not to demonize immigrants. Honestly, well, let's actually, since we're already on it, let's go ahead and talk about immigration policy. I mean, personally, I think we should have double, triple the amount of immigration in the United States. But there's other things that are in place, I think, that would have to be changed. How do you feel?
I'm all for complete open immigration if there was no welfare state. This is the problem we're running into now, because people look back at the Ellis Island and say, well, back then we didn't have, there was no tax burden upon taking in immigrants. And there's been studies to show that there is a tax burden to taking in immigrants. So that is not a good way to go because you're putting more strain on the government and, of course, the taxpayer, ultimately, every time you take in more immigrants. Now, if we had a system where there was no tax burden to it, there was no benefits, if the people wanted to come and work hard and, because honestly, the people that are willing to come and start a whole new life and work hard and make these contributions are the kind of people we want. That's who we want here. But when you get in these European type situations where you see these immigrants from the Middle East complaining about they don't give us the nice houses, they don't give us the food, it's because those immigrants were told you're going to get free stuff when you go here. It's just free. They just hand it out. And they do to a certain extent, but they're disillusioned because they thought, oh, I'd get here and I thought I was going to live this life just like every other European. And then they discover they actually have to work. And like I said, a lot of that's not their fault. They're just told that in their countries. Like it's a wonderland. You just get everything for free. And we don't want that in America where people just think they can come here and get free housing, free food. That's not what we want. We want them to come here for the opportunity.
Yeah. No, again, like I said, I think immigrants are great. I think, the more the merrier, as long as they're A, the type that want to come here and, participate, and B, that, it's not going to be a large liability.
Yeah.
And obviously you're going to screen, do background, quick background checks
Yeah.
already, make sure everybody's, not wanted for murder in their country or something like that. Obviously, you don't want a fleeing fugitive. But I think that would actually be the better option to go forward as far as immigration policy.
Well, we already see it. Immigrants in America, and it tends to be immigrants from overseas that they actually had to get a plane ticket to come here. They do far better than Americans. Your Indian population, a lot of your Africans, they have to come here over the seas, and they really have to put that effort to get here. They're very driven people. A lot of them own small businesses. So that's great. That's the people you want. And really, they even did a study where immigrants from Norway, because you know how they always point to Norway as being this very successful country. Yeah. Immigrants from Norway do better in America than they do in Norway. So I just think that points to the kind of people that are willing to do that. Now, where Europe has their problem is the land migration, where it's not so hard to get there. It does not take dedication, and you just start walking with a bunch of people. And I think we're seeing that here from Central America. I know a lot of Americans have this misconception that they think Mexico. Actually, the Mexican illegal aliens have dropped off rapidly. It's Central America now is the main concern. And it's a concern for Mexico as well.
Yeah, well, we see that actually, oddly enough, with the migrant and immigrant. See, again, it's the
newspeak.
It's exactly. It's the bombardment within the mainstream media outlets that'll make you do that. But the folks coming in from Central America, from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, places like that, they're coming in, and you're seeing them as they move in through Mexico. Even a lot of the Mexicans are really ticked off, if you will.
Yeah, Mexico was quite upset with that.
They're please, get the heck out of our country, go away, and I believe the mayor in Tijuana was also really miffed, if you will, about it.
Yeah, he was going around wearing a Make Tijuana Great Again hat.
Yeah, which is...
the irony there is just rich.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, I'm not a Trump guy, but I do think that's
good irony. Yeah.
Pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, I watched a short YouTube video. It was just some lady that, common citizen in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
She actually had U.S. citizenship. She chose to live in Mexico. She had dual citizenship.
Oh, cool.
And
you jealous?
She was just observing that they were kind of having the same problem with those Central Americans that Europe had with the Middle Easterners and Africans, like saying, they would go around and distribute refried beans and tortillas, just a simple meal, but trying to help them out.
Mm-hmm.
And she went around with cameras showing that, just food left on the ground. And they would say stuff like, you're giving me garbage food, you're giving me dog food. And these people are trying to help these folks. Which also goes to show, you get a little conspiratorial here, there's something a little more going on with this than just, you don't just walk 2,000 miles. The Appalachian Trail is, I don't know, what is it, 1,500 miles? I mean, roundabout,
Yeah.
It takes training, and people. If you're not in really great shape, you can't do this within one season before the winter hits. A lot of people hike it in sections because they can't do that, and it takes months. So how did a caravan arrive from Central America to the U.S. border within 6 weeks?
Yeah,
something a little off about that. And then they're turning down the food and. Just something a little off about that.
Yeah, it doesn't really seem quite up on the up board, if you will.
No, I mean, most people cannot walk 2,000 miles in a pair of sandals within 5 months.
Or even a good pair of sneakers. Jeez.
Right. Yeah, guys in the Appalachian Trail wear multiple pairs of shoes sometimes. And I heard that talking point by somebody else, and it got me to thinking. I was like, it just doesn't add up.
Okay. All right, let's move on to another topic. Have you ever heard of a company called Genie Energy? We're going to go a little, conspiracy. We're going to have a conspiracy a little bit with this one. And on that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be back to you guys shortly. I guess Jason, do you have a cat?
I don't.
Well, I think you do now.
Let's go see what's going on.
Let's go see what this is about.
Walk in there, buddy, real quick.
So with that interruption, we'd like to take a moment to have a nice public service announcement. Please spay and neuter your cats.
Yeah, since we got interrupted by the cat copulation, I was discussing with Paul that this male feral cat has taken over the neighborhood and had many litters of cats that God knows where they end up. So spay and neuter your animals.
Alrighty, so we're back from the quick break. Again, please hit that like button and that subscribe button. We would greatly appreciate it. Let's get back into it. So before the break, we were going to talk about the next topic, which is Genie Energy, which apparently is an energy company based in Newark, New Jersey. And it's headed up by a lot of really big names. I know Dick Cheney's on the board of directors there. There's a Rothschild, a bunch of other people who have been really high up in various positions in government and higher level finance and what have you, which is kind of interesting because looking at it, I know we talked a little bit about Syria in the last episode, and obviously we know Syria is big on the U.S.'s mind, but it's also a really keen and important interest to Russia. And before, I'm actually really delving into this too much. I realized before I really just thought that it was. Syria gives the Russians access to a nice warm water port. Everything's kind of kosher on that. But after delving into it a little bit more, I found out some more interesting information. Found out that the United States is actually really keen on putting a pipeline from Qatar all the way up through Israel, through Syria, and into Turkey. They really want to do that to be able to get that oil through to the European market. And the Russians are also really keen on doing the same thing, pumping it in from Iran over through Syria and then to the Mediterranean Sea and then via tanker up into Europe. So this kind of brings out a very interesting conundrum why the United States is seemingly so interested in that particular part of the world, that particular region. What are your thoughts?
Play a little bit of devil's advocate. I would say, why couldn't both powers achieve their goals? Why would conflict be necessary for either one power to achieve their goal? That would be my first question: is what's holding them back? You know, the specific things that's holding the U.S. back, that's holding Russia back, and how much interest are they willing to put into it to achieve their goal?
Well, I mean, so far, the United States and Russia have not really exactly played nice together in the sandbox.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun. Moreover, there's the whole notion of the fact that the United States is a really strong ally of Israel. And I know that in recent history, there's an area of what used to be part of Syria, which has now been annexed, more or less, or somewhat administered by Israel, an area particularly called the Golan Heights, which is apparently not only fairly rich in oil reserves, but seemingly a lot of Israeli settlers have kind of settled the area now. There was a war at one point between Israel and Syria in regards to the Golan Heights, and I know that currently an armistice has been signed. So while there's been no official ending of the war, at least they're not shooting at each other for now. So I know that's going on in reference to that. So.
Yeah, and these issues are very complicated. And I've even heard the conspiracy theory put forth of Greater Israel wanting to gain more land. I don't know anything about that. I just heard that mentioned. But ultimately, what I think it comes down to, and I've heard a lot of retired military guys say this, is that sometimes the U.S. will try to gain interest when they already have an excuse to do so. In other words, human rights violations. Well, if we're going to go to war for human rights violations, we could go to war in many places in the world.
Yeah.
But sometimes that may make a convenient excuse to, gain our objective. Or, even a little bit more innocent is like, hey, we're going to go there anyway. Why don't we try to gain our objective since we're going to go there anyway? So there's that thought as well.
Oh, well, yeah, you see that sometimes as like an excuse to do this, that, and the other human rights violations, but there's a lot of places in the world where if that alone was, like you said, we go to war in a lot of places in sub-Saharan Africa where people are getting slaughtered left and right, through, sectarian and ethnic violences.
Yeah, child soldiers and roving gangs, and we don't really seem to care about that.
No, or there's North Korea, we're technically still at war with North Korea, officially, there's been no official, there's an armistice signed to stop shooting at each other for the most part, but we're still technically at war.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go in and deal with that, but nope, we're not going to deal with that because it's not politically convenient at the time. Mm-hmm. So, because obviously the retaliatory attacks on, neighboring countries such as South Korea and Japan would be, have a really high death toll. So, it's not all about human rights and all the, feel-good stuff that the American propaganda machine likes to feed you.
Yeah, and really, if you think historically, the machinations of war were not, it never really was about moral values or whatnot. War has always been ultimately about resources in human history, overwhelmingly so. So, we like to think in our modern times that it's all for the greater good or what have you. But if you look historically, it's been about gaining resources and helping your allies and somehow gaining off of it. I think in recent years, the U.S. has tried to put forth a face that we don't gain anything. There is no spoils war. We just go and take care of what we need to take care of, then we go home. I'm not sure if I believe that.
I don't think in a lot of the military conflicts of the United States more recently, I don't think it's necessarily spoils of war in like the traditional sense of, they have this XYZ resource, we get that XYZ resource because we conquered that area. I think it's more of they're not playing nice geopolitically with us. We're going to take you out as far as your government,
sure,
and put somebody in who is going to play nice with us.
But it's still strategic gains with economies and trade, and I mean, there's so many things that go into it that it still is a material gain in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's a material gain in the aspect of kind of having more or less having their way and less of we get stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
which is what it was. You know.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
pillaging a chest of gold anymore, but it's imposing your will on the geopolitical region that you're engaged in.
Exactly. And we're seeing China do that actually now, slowly becoming more of a regional hegemony in East and Southeast Asia. They're kind of, pushing their might out. I know there's the islands in the South China Sea, some of which you see are the man-made islands, where they're kind of pushing their territory, quote unquote, out to extend the international boundaries with these artificial reefs that they've created. There's a lot of islands that are in disputed territories, and I think there's one. So there's a set of islands. Obviously, there's the islands in between Japan and China that are, in kind of a conflict region between the two of them, who administers these islands. But there's also ones in the South China Sea as well, between Vietnam, the Philippines, and China, where they're kind of fighting over those as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually really funny. I remember watching a really interesting documentary. There's a station of, I think it's like a dozen Filipino Marines.
I was about to bring this up. Yes, on the half-sunken ship. Yes. I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, it's a scuttled boat that's like crashed on a reef, and there's like 12 Filipino Marines that hang out there, and they just kind of, and they don't really have anything.
Oh yeah, it's showing like they're fishing, they're just hanging out. Yeah,
exactly. The Chinese military comes to take it. It's going to be like, oh, okay, here you go. I mean, there's 12 of us. Nothing we can do about it. But it's like they're maintaining a presence.
Yeah. I think the whole concept with that one is that it used to be an island, and it kind of got, it was just a little sandbar, basically, and it just got washed out to where it was just a little reef, and so they just sit there and protect the territory.
Protect the boat.
Yeah.
It's pretty hilarious.
But. Yeah, I saw that too, where the highlight of their day was a fishing vessel coming by and, resupplying them with some things.
Yeah. So it definitely brings it like the interesting bits of the geopolitical nature of things.
I do want to just call out Will and say you got to come on for our conspiracy show. For those of you who don't know, I know we've mentioned him a couple of times, and he will bring, he will reference his claims and everything. It should be an interesting show when we finally get him on here.
We got to call him out.
That's why I'm calling him out on the show.
All right. Well, hopefully he shows up. It would be nice to have a couple of guests on. Yeah, I guess if there's anybody watching the show that's in the Middle Tennessee area, I guess, Nashville area, want to be a guest on the show, you can always reach out to us. Our email's in the description as well. And obviously, please smash that like button and that subscribe button. Make sure to push the little bell icon so you get notifications when new content's out. And also follow us on Facebook as well. So I guess all the way from our studios right here in Nashville. Have a good night. We'll see you again next time.
Have a good night, guys.